In today's Reddit tale, my entitled relatives tried to claim my late grandma's lakeside cabin so they could profit from it, and when I refused, they actually forced their way in and wrecked the place. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but after everything that went down with my family, I needed to put it into words. If you've ever dealt with greedy or entitled relatives, you'll probably get where I'm coming from, but believe me, this whole ordeal went far past anything I ever imagined. Let me give you some background. My grandma was my anchor growing up. She was the one steady person I could depend on. My mom died when I was just a kid, and a few years later my dad remarried my stepmom, and him were, well, let's just say, far from nurturing. They had 2 kids together, my stepbrother and stepsister, and they always acted like their new family was whole without me. I was always the outsider. My dad and stepmom barely cared about what I wanted, or felt. I guess I reminded them too much of my mom, so they poured their energy into their own little unit. That's why I spent nearly all my time at my grandma's cabin by the lake. That small place became my safe space where I could breathe and just feel loved. The cabin itself wasn't fancy. It was older, a bit weathered, but it had character. My grandma and I would sit for hours on the porch watching the sun drop into the water. We'd fish off the dock, take long walks through the woods, and she'd share stories of her youth. My happiest childhood memories live in that place, and I knew she cherished it just as much as I did. About a year ago, she passed away after a long illness. Losing her crushed me. She had been my rock, but in her will she left the cabin to me, her most treasured possession. Trusting me with it meant everything. I thought this would be a new chapter where I could honor her memory and keep the cabin in the family. Oh, how naive I was. After the funeral, things were quiet for a while. No surprise, my dad and stepmom rarely included me in family matters. But about 2 months later, I suddenly get a call from my dad inviting me to dinner. Strange enough, since they never usually asked me over, I thought maybe it was a peace gesture. Maybe with grandma gone, they wanted to finally build a relationship, so I went. Big mistake. Dinner was tense. My stepmom was laying it on thick, acting overly sweet, offering me wine, asking about work, things she had never cared about. My dad just sat there watching me silently, which made me uneasy. I knew something was up. After we ate, he finally asked about the cabin. What were my plans? I told him I wanted to fix it up a little and keep it as a retreat to honor grandma. He nodded but didn't look pleased, and my stepmom jumped in. She started saying it was wasteful to keep it just for myself. She said it should be turned into a rental like an Airbnb to generate income. Clearly, they had rehearsed this. She painted it like a family project with all profit from. I was stunned. They didn't care about the memories tied to the place. They just saw dollar signs, and they acted like I was selfish for not jumping on board. I told them no. Plainly, I explained it was sentimental, and I wanted it private to stay close to grandma's memory. I figured they'd understand, or at least respect it, but I was wrong. My stepmom snapped. She ranted that I was ungrateful, wasting an opportunity to help the family. My dad finally spoke, saying I couldn't even afford to fix it myself, and that they were trying to help me seriously. I told them I didn't need their help or their scheme. I left furious, but assumed that was the end of it. Turns out it was just the beginning. The next weeks were hell. My phone blew up nonstop with texts and calls. First, they tried persuasion, talking about potential profits, how it was a win-win, and how I was being unreasonable when I didn't respond. They shifted to guilt trips. My stepmom sent a dramatic text about needing the money for retirement, accusing me of being selfish. My dad sent cold, short messages like, think about what grandma would have wanted, or you're making a mistake. I ignored most of it, not wanting to fan the flames, but then they started showing up at my place. My dad would sit outside in his car waiting, or my stepmom would not, pretending she was just in the area. The worst moment came when my dad ambushed me at work. He showed up unannounced in my office, demanding to talk. My coworkers staring while I burned with embarrassment. I told him we'd talk later just to get him out, but I knew then things were spiraling out of control. I decided to take a weekend away at the cabin to clear my mind. I thought some solitude by the lake would help, but when I arrived, I knew immediately something was off. The front door was slightly open, and I was sure I'd locked it last visit. My heart raced as I went inside, and there it was. They had been there. Maybe they used an old key or just broken, but either way, they had trespass. Furniture was rearranged. Grandma's belongings were boxed up, and paint samples with renovation sketches lay on the table. They had already started planning their project. I was livid. I called my dad, demanding answers. At first, he denied it, but eventually admitted they'd gone there to help me get started. Since I was taking too long, I told him if they ever stepped foot there again, I called the police. After that, things went quiet for a while. I changed the locks and installed a security system, thinking maybe it was over. Months later, I got a call from the sheriff. The cabin had been broken into again, only this time it wasn't subtle. Windows, smashed furniture, destroyed grandma's keepsakes missing. I was crushed. My sanctuary was in ruins. I knew in my gut it wasn't, but with no proof, the sheriff called it a burglary. Still, I knew better. Now, months later, I'm still trying to pick up the pieces. My bond with my dad and stepmom is completely severed. They cut me off, blaming me for tearing the family apart because I wouldn't share the cabin. I haven't spoken to them since and don't plan to. The cabin is under repair, but it'll never feel the same. Those warm memories are now tainted by what they did, but I stood firm. I didn't let them take what mattered most, no matter how hard they pushed. What I've learned through all this is that family doesn't always mean love or loyalty. Sometimes the ones meant to support you will betray you for their own gain. And when that happens, you have to defend what's yours no matter how painful it gets. Thanks for reading. And if you're ever in a similar spot, don't be afraid to protect what matters. Some things are worth holding on to at any cost.